Hi, my name is Amanda Panacea, and you're listening to the Healer Revolution podcast. This is a community for self-healers, biohackers, practitioners, and any other helping professionals. You're in the right place if you're seeking conversations about how pain becomes passion, the connection between physical, energetic, mental, and our spiritual self, finding your body's ancient wisdom, the latest biohacking technologies, clinical research, and if you just want to nerd out about complex biochemistry and quantum physics. But this is also for entrepreneurs who seek infinite abundance and a supportive community. So pour a cup of King coffee or Sisters tea and let's join the revolution. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Healer Revolution podcast. I am your host, Amanda Panacea, and today I'm really excited to be interviewing my new friend, Jen Donovan. She is a powerhouse in the health space when it comes to things like mental health, mast cell activation, and nervous system regulation. Hi, Jen. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, I'm so excited for our conversation. You're one of my favorite people to follow and read your content for. So yeah, I'm really excited to be on here.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like there's really only a handful of women that I know of that have come out the other side of mast cell at this point on the little Instagram circles that we're in. And so I really appreciate, all of the things that you post, and everything really resonates with me as well. So it's going to be a good conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll at least, are public about it. Like I remember when I was first really ill, like people would kind of like pass rumors along on like the message boards and stuff of like, well, I heard about this one person who recovered, but like no one could get in contact with them anymore. They would just kind of like peace out of the online space once they recovered. So it's like I heard these rumors that like it was possible. And so it was really important to me. I was like, when I recover, because I really tried to have that mindset of like, when I do recover, I'm going to be really public about my recovery and I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to let people know it's possible. And I just love that we're at a point where it's more than just me now. Like you're talking about it and there's a few other people out there too. But yeah, it's not a whole lot. It's a confusing condition for a lot of clinicians.
Oh, yeah. For anyone dealing with it, clinicians, doctors, the world right now, I think it's what we talked about the last time we chatted was talking about the purpose of dealing with this condition. And then, of course, going through the C word where everything shut down and now people are developing this condition more and more. Now it's like, oh, I see, because I can actually help some of these people walk them through this and recover. So that's so beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so
that timing was real for me.
Yes, for sure. So I would love to hear your story. I know we have a lot in common already, and I really like to hear the details about the pain to passion stories. I think that helps other people to see that it's not just, oh, I just did these steps and I healed and now here I am helping other people, that there was a lot of pain and figuring things out behind the scenes for many years before you got to this point. So tell us a little bit about your history and how you're here now.
Sure. Yeah, and that's so well said. I mean, I think, if you search for like stock photos for like healing journey or something like that, it's like people wearing white linen, like lounging by pools and like the sun's out and they're on top of a mountain. And we have this idea of like healing is this beautiful and light thing, but it is shadow work. Like it is dark. It is going through the underworld. In some ways, I was sicker when I was healing than before I started healing. Like I look at pictures of myself in 2015 when I had mast cell. I didn't really know what it was, but I was definitely starting to get the symptoms of mast cell. And from the outside, I looked pretty normal. Like no one would have been able to tell I was suffering, really seriously. And then I look at pictures of myself, summer 2017 when I was like 6 months in to like really deep healing work, and I look like a almost like a cancer patient. Like it's like my skin is like gaunt, I'm like yellow, I had lost all this weight, like people were starting to ask me like, oh my gosh, what is wrong? It was like suddenly people were believing that I was sick, where I was kind of met with skepticism before that, but it was because I was healing. And so all that toxicity that had been inside of me was starting to come out and be visible. So I always really try to reiterate that with my clients, is like, the healing journey is not, it's not pretty. It's not all love and light. It's really, really tough.
Right.
Um, yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I guess that was a bit of a tangent, but I'll just start at the beginning. Yeah, I had always had allergies. Like, I had jaundice when I was a baby. I always had these like mysterious rashes when I was growing up. I had these food allergies. I was always kind of an anxious kid, especially like social anxiety. But from the standard American perspective, I was healthy. And I
Mhm.
would always even tell people, like, yeah, I think I'm pretty healthy. Um, but when I was a teenager, things just really started escalating in terms of I was just getting infection after infection after infection. I was just on antibiotics after antibiotics after antibiotics. I got my appendix out, which now I know is an early sign of gut dysbiosis to have your appendix out. I ended up having my tonsils removed when I was 15 because I just kept getting infections. Like they just wouldn't stop, and I was just in so much pain all the time. And then I had a little bit of a respite as I was a young adult. But during that time, I was also partying a lot. I was using a lot of substances. I definitely was not living a very healthy lifestyle, but maybe that was partly masking like development of more symptoms. I don't know, because my anxiety was definitely getting worse over time, but I think I was masking it a lot. But then it got to a point where I started getting infections again. But this time it was mostly UTIs. I was just getting UTIs over and over and over again, and then yeast infections, and then bacterial vaginosis. And at one point, they told me I had staph, a strep infection vaginally, which is like at the time I was like,
Yeah.
what? How is that even possible? And they just wrote it off as like, just happens sometimes.
Yeah.
And I was I don't know. That seems weird. Like, doesn't that seem like something's off here? Like, shouldn't we investigate? But I just took the antibiotics because that's all they were giving me. And eventually I had a really bad UTI where I ended up spiking a super high fever. I ended up going into urgent care late one night, and they were nervous because I was coming in with this super high fever. And so they gave me IV antibiotics for
Mm.
UTI. And I didn't know any better. I was like, yeah, I'm scared. I have a high fever from this. I just want to get better. And it was pretty much after that that things really started going downhill. I feel like that was like the final insult to my immune system. Although at the same time, I was living in an apartment in a super old, not very well maintained house that always had mold,
Yeah.
and so I think I was probably getting exposed to mold at the same time. And then I got shingles, so I think the viruses in my body were just like really starting to rear their head. So, and this is so often what I see with my clients too, is it's like there's not just one thing. People always want to know, like, what's my root cause? What was your root cause? And it's like, oh my gosh, like pick one of 10, right? Like it's just all these things that combine into this perfect storm. And so by early by end of 2015, early 2016, I was having severe panic attacks, severe chronic fatigue. I was having all sorts of allergic reactions just throughout the day to almost anything I did, facial swelling and hives and shortness of breath and tightness in my throat. And I really thought I was going crazy. Like part of me, and I was studying to be a mental health therapist while all this was going down, of course. So part of me was like, oh my gosh, am I having a psychotic break? But my colleagues reminded me, like, if you're asking the question, you're probably not. But I really did feel like I was on the edge of it. And these kinds of things, like things like psychosis, I mean, they're on a spectrum, right? And so I felt like that was the road I was going down. Like things felt very unreal. I felt very depersonalized. It really felt like I was trapped in this hell realm that I could not get out of. And I was going to doctor after doctor after doctor, but finally did get referred to a allergist because I was having visible like rashes and hives and swelling. Like that was a thing that people could at least see. And so eventually I was referred to an allergist, and she like, bless her, in 2016, this was not very well known. She immediately recognized it as MCAS and was like,
Wow. That's
this is a classic case. Like you fit all the diagnostic criteria. And then at least I got a name for it and knew what was going on because I'd never heard of this before.
Yeah, that's incredible. In 2016, an allergist, because usually when the doctor goes, all right, I'm going to refer you to an allergist, like my eyes roll in the back of my head so far. So that's
Yep.
pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Good for her.
Yeah. Absolutely. But I mean, of course, you know, her solution was, okay, well, let's trial all these different antihistamines and mast cell
Yeah.
stabilizers and see what works. And the reason she knew about it is because she had just been to a conference with Dr. Afrin, you know,
Mm.
who probably most people watching this channel know who he is, but he's a leading mast cell doctor. And that's kind of his approach. I mean, he does give some lip service to like there's probably a root cause in the limbic system and in the immune system, you know, in the gut. You know, I mean, I have heard him talk about that before, but when it comes to actual treatment, it seems like his protocol is mainly just like keep trialing different antihistamines until you find one that works. And so that was the approach that she wanted to use with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so you mentioned a lot of like physically what you were going through to develop this, but what about that? You know, why did you decide to be a mental health counselor anyways? There's always
Yeah,
a
right.
a childhood story behind why you were gravitating towards that in the first place.
Yeah, no, I so appreciate you asked that because I know anytime someone says that they're a healer of any kind, you know there's a story behind it, right? That's how that happens. Yeah, so I mean, I mentioned briefly, like I'd always struggle with anxiety even from the time I was a kid. And I was always drawn to kind of like darker things. Like my brain just kind of would go to dark places very easily. I mean, I definitely had a stressful childhood in the sense that I was expected to perform at a very high level. Like I had a lot of, you know, pressure and, you know, my parents are very high functioning folks. So I was definitely like conditioned to be very type A, very academic. But I wasn't like abused as a child or anything like that. But yeah, I just found that the combination of this hyper productive mindset that I was really conditioned to have combined with a temperament that was probably just like a little more sensitive. Like I do have some of those genes like COMT that predispose people to be a little more emotionally sensitive to things in the world. And so I think that combination, like it the world felt very overwhelming to me, I think,
Mm-hmm.
for most of my life. And so I really coped with that by like kind of hardening myself and kind of embracing this very like kind of dark, cynical mindset in my life. And so I from the time I was a teenager, I really kind of identified as someone with mental illness. And I just kind of I had gone through a trial of trying some psychiatric medications, and they had given me some really bizarre, like worse symptoms. And so I had gone off of those. So medications didn't really work for me. And so I was just kind of like, I guess I'm just going to cope with this as well as I can and just kind of live my life. But I did really want to support other people who were
Mm-hmm.
in the same boat as me. Like I did really feel a resonance for people who struggle with mental illness and didn't really see a way out, who just kind of, you know, realize like this is just how my brain is, because that's really what I felt. Um, Ironically, when I started my healing journey in 2017, and this is different for everyone. I don't want to give the impression this is how everyone experiences because I've seen the opposite happen as well. But for me, my mental health symptoms virtually disappeared long before my physical symptoms did. So that's part of what really gave me this entire worldview shift, you know, that has been like the journey I've been on the last 8 years, is I had done the therapy, I had tried the medication, I did the coping skills, and I had really resigned myself of like, I'm just a mentally ill person. This is just my brain. Um, and that ended up not being true at all once I made some very dramatic lifestyle changes. And that just blew me open to a whole different way of looking at bodies and
Mm-hmm.
looking at our brains. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's get into that. Like you've been diagnosed, you're ready to start antihistamines. You are taking a deep look at how you got here and what were some of the big things that moved the needle for you?
Hmm. Yeah, so the antihistamines and the mast cell stabilizers actually did work for about a month. And I kind of had this pink cloud moment of like, oh, maybe I did just need medication and I'll just have to take medication the rest of my life and I'll be okay. But of course, because I was not addressing the root causes, the condition kept progressing. And so within about a month, maybe two, all the symptoms came back even worse. And it didn't seem to matter how many antihistamines I was taking, or mast cell stabilizers I was taking. Like I was just deeper and deeper, into the into the darkness of this condition. And people who struggle with this know, like it really affects like mind, body, spirit. Like it is very, very debilitating. And so it really was taking over my whole life. And so that's when I just decided, like, all right, I'm gonna figure this out on my own, because I didn't know if I wanted to live like that the rest of my life. And no one who officially was supposed to be helping me was helping me. So I learned first. I just started Googling about mast cell activation syndrome, and the first blogs that came up were natural health blogs. And I had never ventured into that world before. I didn't know anything about it. I was like, might as well try. So the first thing, of course, is like a low histamine diet. And so I cut out all the processed foods out of my diet. It was like a whole foods, low histamine diet was like what I stumbled on. So I cut out like top inflammatory foods, top high histamine foods, all the processed foods that I had been eating. And within about 2 weeks, my symptoms went from like 20 a day to more like 10 a day. So I was still very ill. I was still very debilitated, but it was like a noticeable reduction in my symptoms. And that's when I was like, oh, okay. Like there is something to this. Like shocking, what I put in my body day to day actually does affect how it functions. Like I don't know why that's such a radical idea that like I had never considered before. Most of the doctors don't seem to ever consider before, but that's when I was like, okay, like this is the path that I have to go on. Um, and around the same time that I was really starting to overhaul my diet, I was actually getting certified in a nervous system regulation modality called tension and trauma releasing exercises. Um, I had already been working on trying to get certified in a somatic modality because separately from everything I was going through, I was feeling frustrated at the lack of progress I was making with my clients as a mental health therapist. I
Mhm.
was just feeling like I was not getting results. People just came back over and over again with the problem of the week. And I wanted to do deeper work with people. I really wanted to like help people get to the deeper roots of why they were having the mental health problems that they were having. And I just didn't feel like I was making much progress and I wanted more tools. So I had already been exploring the concept of somatic therapy and the idea that, oh, maybe people with mental health issues have chronically dysregulated nervous systems. And that's part of the issue going on. And that was an intriguing idea to me because it seemed to explain a lot about my own life and my clients. And so when you get certified in this modality, you have to do a lot of your own personal work. Most reputable, modalities like that, like they make you do it yourself first. And so this really coincided. So I started this training right at the same time that I started really shifting my diet and my lifestyle. And I had this very visceral experience of my nervous system basically telling me, and I know that might sound really woo and weird to some people listening, but like it was a very intense experience of like feeling like something inside me was like speaking directly to me. And I can only describe it as like my nervous system talking to me. Through this modality, it's like it finally had a vehicle to really talk directly to me. And basically it said, finally you're listening was basically what it said. Like Thank you. I have been like banging on the door trying to get your attention for years, and now you're finally listening. Like, let me help you. And it just changed everything for me because I had been trying to run away from my illness and run away from my mental illness before that, and just like run away from my problems in general in my life, right? Like just avoiding and dissociating, disconnecting and masking. And I suddenly realized, like, oh my gosh, like this is the end of the road. Like this condition is my body telling me in like the last way it knows how, like you have to start listening. Like you have to actually start paying attention to what is going on inside of you. And so for me, it was the combination of doing some pretty intensive dietary and, lifestyle interventions, but also really just changing the way that I lived my life on a nervous system level day to day. Like that was the magic combination for me that actually got me to
Mhm.
recovery.
Yeah, so much of that resonates. I mean, I really was like, I have to become an entirely new person. Like the way that I was living was toxic and detrimental, and I was self-sabotaging over and over again and pretending like I wasn't by having these achievements and promotions and degrees. And that radical responsibility hits you really hard, but like when you're ready to hear it, nothing compares to it. There's nothing that you can do outside of yourself than finally listening to that little subconscious voice, that those parts of you that really know the truth about who you are
Yeah.
instead of all that
Yeah.
conditioning. Yeah,
You know,
amazing.
and it was interesting the way you're saying that. It reminds me, like at the time I had this very strong sense of surrendering to my illness. And I would talk about this with people in my life. Like, I've had this like experience and I've decided I just need to surrender to my illness. And they were interpreting it as giving up,
Yeah.
right? And I had to really, really explain it in a particular way because people were misunderstanding me. And I think sometimes people still do when I talk about this of like, so many people come to this like with this attitude of fighting, right? We see this with all sorts of
Yeah.
stuff, like we're battling cancer, like we're fighting heart disease, like we have this attitude of like taking up arms against what's going on. And I think we actually need to approach it the opposite way of like embrace it, like give it a
Yeah.
hug and like ask it what it's trying to tell us. And so when I said surrender, it wasn't meaning I was giving up. In fact, I had more conviction than ever that I was going to recover if I actually did listen to my body. But it was more like I wasn't going to override anything anymore, and I wasn't going to force my body to do anything that it wasn't ready for, like ever
Right.
again.
Yeah, because especially growing up with anxiety, you're used to trying to control everything to regulate yourself. It's that false sense of control that we want so that we don't feel as out of control. Whereas with an illness like
Yeah.
that, there's no controlling it. You're
Yeah.
completely out of control.
Yeah. Yeah, and I had parents, that really like pulled themselves into the middle class from more of a low income upbringing. And I think people who come from families like that, like these early upwardly mobile families, like there's this real attitude of like you have to constantly be striving, right? If you
Mhm.
want anything out of life, you have to constantly be working and striving and doing. And like that's how you have success. That's very much like the energetic attitude. And I think a lot of people with chronic illness come from this standpoint. So I really took that on, and I really had this idea if I wasn't constantly pushing or doing, then I was inadequate or I was going to fail or something bad was going to happen to me. And this was so mimicked in the way I had originally approached my illnesses in terms of like, oh, I have an infection, take antibiotics.
Yeah.
Oh, I have a headache, like take an anti-inflammatory. Oh, I have anxiety. Okay, I'm going to try a medication, or I'm going to try this coping skill. I'm going to try to like just keep striving and pushing and rushing.
Yeah.
And so much of I think true recovery is actually like doing a 180 on the energetics of what got you to that illness in the first place. And there's so many levels here in terms of how we're approaching life.
Yeah. I think I've seen somewhere on the internet, if you type aid your way into this illness, you're not going to type aid your way out.
know, and it's so hard because type A people are so good at figuring things out. Like we're so good at the discipline. So it's such a double-edged sword. It's like we know how to do the research, we know how to figure it out on ourselves, we know how to like, set ourselves a schedule. And in some ways, like, yeah, that's good. You're taking it seriously, but man, that lust for results, that like
Yeah.
urgency, dude, it's gonna sabotage you every time.
Yeah, I remember thinking at one point, maybe if I just like didn't work as much, which was a good thing to be thinking at the time, but it was like, and I replaced all my time with castor oil packs and coffee enemas and going outside and doing the walk, and then I'll do the somatic technique, and I was like, okay, I did that, and that didn't work either. Being perfect actually, I think, made me worse, like trying to do it perfectly and do all the things. So if you're listening and you're thinking, oh, I'm not healing because I have too much time living my life, no.
Right. And if your healing routine is making you feel stressed and anxious, like it's not working. Like
Right.
100%. Like no matter how good it is, you cannot heal if what is healing you supposedly is stressing you out. That's not going to work.
Yes, for sure. Well said. So tell us a little bit more about your philosophy for how you work with clients with conditions that are similar, and some of
Yeah.
the steps that you take when you start working with someone.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really do try to take a whole body approach because of my experience, where I really think if I had just on the diet and had kept, like, just like we're talking about, kept that perfectionist type A mindset, I probably would not have recovered. But I also really do think if I had just done the nervous system work, if I had just done the mindset work and I hadn't changed my diet at all or worked on healing my gut or detoxing at all, I don't think I would have recovered either. I mean, I was in such a serious state of toxicity. I mean, the things that were coming out of me as I was healing, I was like, man, there's no way I would have healed with that thing still inside of me, right? Like, so I really felt like it was this all-encompassing approach that got me to health. So I really try to do that with my clients. I try to really instill like it's not just going to be one magical nutrient, it's not just going to be one magical food you eliminate, and it's not just going to be one magical brain retraining practice or super special meditation you do either. Like you're going to have to do a variety of things in a paced manner, and you're really going to have to, you know, implement things slowly over a long period of time. Part of the reason is that with this condition, people are so hypersensitive, partly because they are in such a state of high toxicity and extreme stress. And so the body can't heal everything at once. It's more like we have to uncover layers, really similarly to your like layer model of
Mhm.
MCAS, right? I've kind of come to the same conclusion that it's like, okay, we just got to peel back a layer at a time. So I do start people out with a lot of mindset work. We use a program called neuro meditation in our program, and we do use a lot of like EFT tapping and techniques like that as well to try to help people work through emotional blockages that are coming up. But then we also start right away starting to use nutrition to heal the gut. Again, most people with these conditions are not going to do well with a bunch of antimicrobial supplements or heavy kind of gut cleanses. So we just use nutrition as a way to rebalance the gut microbiome. So I'm a GAPS practitioner, so I do use the specific carbohydrate diet, but I try to do it in a way that is going to work for people with lots of sensitivities, um, especially histamine sensitivities. But of course, with that comes all sorts of other things. I mean, most people come to me, it's like they can't tolerate salicylates or sulfur or lectins or oxalates. I mean, once your body starts getting into the state of high sensitivity, it's just going to target everything. So sometimes we do have to start with a very simple diet, and then we slowly expand it to make it more therapeutic over time.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people end up doing like full carnivore. I've
Mhm.
never heard of anyone doing veganism that has helped. However, I did have a doctor who said that she healed being a vegetarian and that she did have MCAS. So I was like, okay, maybe there's one, but is that kind
I
of your,
actually only know of one girl who recovered from MCAS on a vegan diet. But
Okay.
I have my theory about why it worked for her. And I don't see that usually.
Hmm.
The vast majority of people I see, it was a meat-based method, absolutely,
Hmm.
whether full carnivore or close. So that's what I tend towards. And with my understanding of nutrition, that's what I feel like is going to be more sustainable for the long term. Like because this is a long-term healing practice. Like I think technically some people might be able to heal on a vegan diet, but it would have to be a very specific type. And I don't think for most people it'd actually be sustainable for the period of time that you would have to. I do think
Hmm.
that animal-based foods contain key nutrients for health that a lot of people with MCAS are very depleted in. So that's the approach that I use.
Yeah, I agree. And I will never tell someone what to eat because you know your body best, but
Yeah.
we still have to make sure we're getting in the adequate nutrition for doing the things like detox, the organs that need the nutrients, making neurotransmitters. Um, all of those things require nutrition. So I
Yeah,
definitely would lean much more towards that animal based as well.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
And I think it's just important to not be dogmatic
Yeah.
ultimately. Like I have a method that worked for me that I see work the most often with my clients that scientifically makes the most sense of me through what I know about ancestral nutrition. But it's like if anyone is ever telling you like this is the only way to heal, like you're always going to be able to find an exception, right? And
Right.
so again, we've got that. And so many people who come to me have built up so much food fear through whatever influencer they've been following, right? Of like, but I thought we couldn't eat this because this was bad, And it's like, well, there's a light side and a dark side to every food out there, right? So we have to be strategic, but we need to not have that fear.
Yeah, and especially if you're already dealing with MCAS, when you decide that something is toxic or bad for you, guess what? Your nervous system is going to be responding to that even more
React to it.
readily.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then there's the
Yeah.
shame if, oh, I ate something that was bad and I had a reaction and I'm doing this wrong and it's not perfect,
Yeah.
and the thought loops that
Yeah.
happen after that. So yeah,
Absolutely.
food definitely a big piece. And then you mentioned some of the techniques you do with like nervous system regulation. Besides this meditation technique, what are some of the other big components that you feel like people really struggle with, um,
Hmm.
that are dealing with mast cell?
Um, like other things in the nervous system realm or outside of that?
Anything, yeah. I'm thinking more like circadian rhythms, that kind of stuff. That's what's coming to
Yeah.
mind.
Um, yeah. Well, I mean, so I really think that MCAS is really a condition of excess toxicity in the body. And if you look at the basic physiology of what mast cell activation is, mast cells are like little patrollers who are looking for invaders, and they are literally looking for things that they consider to be toxins. And part of the reason um, that mast cells do what they do is they're trying to make tissues more permeable so they can pull toxins out. So histamine makes tissues more permeable. And there's so much to be said about why then that means mast cell correlates with things like EDS and dysautonomia. I mean, there's all these really fascinating connections, right? But it's because it's saying, oh, there's a toxin here, like I need to pull it out, and then I need to inflame the tissue so it can heal. A lot of people don't think about that either, that inflammation is actually a healing response, right? It's like, oh, let's make this area inflame so we can heal the tissues here. And that's happening for everyone all the time. Like anytime you get a cut, I mean, technically that's a little bit of mast cell activation, right? That's like a little bit of a healing response, like cleaning out the gunk and healing. But that's normal. That's good. Like mast cells certainly aren't bad. Histamines aren't bad. They're a normal part of our physiology. But with mast cell activation, there is at least the perception by your body that you are in such a high state of toxicity that it either has to make a lot more mast cells than it usually would, or all these mast cells need to degranulate at a much higher rate. So it kind of depends what flavor of mast cell you have, what's happening there. Now, I would argue that there's probably truly some kind of state of high toxicity that initially triggers that response. Now, of course, then with nervous system dysregulation, experiences of trauma, mindset issues, all of these things, all of that is going to severely exacerbate and snowball that effect. But I think initially, almost always the body is responding to some type of toxic overload. And so people will get really fixated on one or the other, in terms of what I was saying earlier of like people want to know what the root cause is. And some people get really fixated on parasites, some people get really fixated on mold, some people get really fixated on heavy metals. I think all of these kinds of toxicities usually come together. I have rarely found a client that truly only had one of those things going on. And whether or not they show up on tests always, right? Like sometimes people will test negative for parasites, but then like they're seeing them come out of them once they start doing healing. So it's like, I really think people with mast cell probably have multiple types of very high toxicity in the body. And so not only rebalancing the gut is really important, but also getting at those detox pathways. People with mast cell activation syndrome tend to have slow detox pathways. We tend to have things like COMT, like I do, or MTHFR. I have that too, and some others that tend to make us detox a bit slower than your average person. It's really important to note that it doesn't mean you don't detox. I think that's an
Right.
unfortunate myth that has gotten put out there. You do detox, you just detox a little bit slower. So it just means that if you are exposed to a lot of toxins or you have nutrient deficiencies, you're going to be more likely to accumulate them as opposed to move them out. And so detox support is something I work on a lot with people, but this is something we have to go really, really slow at. I really don't recommend that people do a big mold detox or heavy metal detox protocol early on in their recovery. I find that I get so many people who did that first and it actually made their mast cell worse, totally overloaded their already overwhelmed system. So this is something that I think is actually essential for long-term recovery, but it's something that we have to pace really carefully.
Yeah, I totally agree. Pace is the key word. And again, nutrition is what we need to detox. We don't need an herb to push the detox as much as we need just the building blocks and the cofactors and all of that for the liver to work, the kidney to work. So I love that you take this slower approach because so many people probably come to you and they're like, well, I did this parasite cleanse that I read online and now I get hives every day or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I get so many people who come to me after they've done IV chelation therapy or after they've done
Mm-hmm.
a heavy Lyme treatment or after they've done like an extended fast and their bodies weren't ready for it. And again,
Mm-hmm.
problem was is that they weren't actually listening to what their body was telling them they needed, which usually is actually more slowness and more
Mm-hmm.
gentleness, not more pushing. So they're
Yeah.
replicating this that got them sick in the first place through the approach that they're taking to healing, and that's a huge
Mm-hmm.
problem.
Yeah, but it is very confusing, as I'm sure you're aware, when you first get into, like, I did a whole degree in functional medicine. And so I was like, the answer is mold detox. And
Right.
it definitely was not. I'm not sure if it helped me or hindered me because I only got worse that year that I was
Right.
trying to do that. So we think we know the answer because we're like, logically, this is what people are teaching. This is what the doctor I went to said is the answer. I have this toxicity. And I think part of that spiritual journey is getting those messages one after one and learning the lesson of, okay, I got to start listening to myself, maybe.
Yeah. Because the
Yeah.
thing is, I mean, when you really start reframing your mindset around these issues, you start to learn that your body is actually smarter than you in a lot of ways. And it actually knows what it can handle and what it can't and what it's ready for and what it needs to prioritize. So your body may be working on detoxing something you don't even know you have. And then read online, oh, like parasites are a root cause of mast cell activation. I'm going to do a parasite cleanse. Then you start doing that, and your body is like, that's not what we're focusing on right now. Like, that's way overwhelming, and now my detox pathways are all backed up, and now my mast cells are even more activated, and it just gets into such a feedback loop. So I really think if we support the foundations, just like you're saying, we don't need to push this, we just need to give you the building blocks. The body will wisely decide what it's ready to let go of. And
Mm-hmm.
I see this all the time, but you need to be patient, because the people I see get the best results are people who are willing to give it a year or two at least.
Mm-hmm.
And very often during the course of that year or two, people will spontaneously start detoxing something if they're being consistent with those foundations. And it's exactly when their body decided they were ready to.
Yeah. And I love that more and more people are shifting into this approach. People are coming out of the pill for every ill, even supplement for every ill, just like in functional
Yeah.
medicine. And you're seeing that more and more and more people are talking about it. I think because mast cells becoming so much more prevalent as well, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I know that you have a big focus on the gut. So of course, when we're giving nutrients and somebody's like, but I've got horrible gut inflammation, leaky gut, parasites, SIBO, SIFO, all the things. How do I know I'm actually absorbing these nutrients? What is your approach when it comes to that, the gut brain access to that
Yeah.
aspect of healing?
Yeah, yeah. So that's why my biggest priority when people come to me nutritionally is to seal the leaky gut. That because if we've got that leaky gut, I mean, we are going to be absorbing every toxin we come into contact with. We're not going to be absorbing our nutrients. We're not able to really um benefit from any like probiotics we might even be taking or anything like that, because they've got nowhere to live. The gut lining's all inflamed, right? So um I tend to promote a version of like the GAPS intro diet um that I call well, formally I call it my blends diet. Informally I call it my baby food diet.
Okay.
People feel like, so the key is like soft, warm, low fiber, right? Like you want to be like
Mm.
super gentle and soft on your gut lining. And so I have people like, some people do this just carnivore if they're very, very sensitive to all plants. I don't usually take people fully carnivore unless we really need to, because I don't like to unnecessarily restrict things. So it's like whatever kind of low starch veggies that you can tolerate, and we like boil them and we blend them, and we just keep it it's very bland, it's very boring, but it's incredibly healing. And usually that helps get a jump start on the gut healing process enough that people can start to tolerate things that may have been triggers for them before. So then we can start to bring in those classic GAPS intro foods, where it's like meat stock, and maybe even a little bit of ferments, sometimes even just a drop or two of like some kefir or sauerkraut juice or something like that. Just little tiny bits of those beneficial probiotics. And then the meat stock, I mean, I'm sure I sound like such a GAPS diet nerd when I say this, but like meat stock is the most magical substance on earth. I'm convinced. Like once people are able to get that in, I just see people's gut health like jump to this whole new level. But man, when you are really ill, a food that is that therapeutic can actually be really hard to onboard. Like I
Mhm.
have people have die off and detox symptoms all the time just from drinking, like sometimes a spoonful of meat
Oh.
stock. So there's something, I mean, there's a reason why in almost every traditional culture, like you give people broth when they're sick, right? Like it's an incredibly healing food. And so again, we just have to get you stable enough that you can get through those little humps and then just onboard it very slowly.
Mm. And you're saying meat stock, and I want to point out that's different than bone broth, correct?
It is. It
Okay.
is. So it's the main difference is actually just the cook time. So
Mhm.
bone broth is great for maintaining your gut health once you're healthy. It is a superfood, like a lot of people make it out to be, absolutely, but it's just way too intense. It's high glutamate, it's high histamine, It tends to have like a pretty high amount of minerals in it, which again, when you're really ill, can be too stimulating. And so meat stock is cooked. Usually I have people start with 2 or 3 hours at the most, and not in an Instapot. There's really no need for that. Just a normal stock pot, do it old school and just cook it for 2, maybe 3 hours. And that's enough to get started with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you have a recipe on your website?
I have a tutorial on my YouTube channel, and then yeah, we actually have a whole class on meat stock in my coaching program. Yeah.
Yeah, because I would have no idea where to start with that
Yeah,
personally.
and it's totally, and I think it's another example of how we have gotten so far away from our roots because again, in traditional cultures, it's like, yeah, when someone's sick, the first thing you do is make them a stock, right? Make
Hmm.
them a soup.
Yeah.
And it's so simple. It's like you're literally just boiling meat for a couple hours, It's like actually one of the simplest things to cook. But people want to load up on their expensive collagen powders instead, when it's like you literally can just boil meat and bones for a couple hours and you have one of the most therapeutic, bioavailable, complete sources of collagen you could ever ask for right there.
Yeah. Simplicity definitely is best. So one of the biggest questions people always ask me, what do I eat? Which we covered. What supplements do I take? When do you
Mhm.
find is the right time to introduce supplements, and what are some of the ones that you feel like are the most beneficial?
Uh-huh. Yeah. So, yeah, I tend to get people who like can't tolerate any supplements in the beginning. And I get a lot of people who are really concerned about it because they know that they have these very severe nutrient deficiencies. And the reality is sometimes it is hard to replenish nutrient deficiencies with just food. Like it's very easy to get your baseline, like recommended daily allowances with food, that's no problem. But when you have a severe deficiency, sometimes you have a debt that you have to make up for, and
Hmm.
so sometimes it can be hard to replenish those just through food. And so people get very anxious about that of like, if I can't tolerate supplements, how am I ever going to get out of my nutrient deficiencies? And I just really try to tell people, like, don't worry about it now. Like, let's just get that foundation in. Let's calm your nervous system. Let's get your gut lining sealed. Let's support your detox pathways very gently. And usually, once we do that, people are more tolerant to supplements, a month, 2 months, 3 months later.
Hmm.
So even if you can't tolerate supplements in the beginning, you can still start healing and actually you'll probably heal better initially. But there's a couple that I see people really tend to need to supplement. Um, One is B1. I have seen, especially for people who have psychiatric and neurological symptoms, which there's a huge overlap, with immune system related conditions. This one is very hard to replenish just through food, because yeah, you can pretty much from like, something like pork or liver or salmon, just kind of your run of the mill meats, you can eat 8 ounces a day and get like a little bit over your RDA. So it's like you can maintain your levels easily with that. But if you're severely deficient, it's very hard to replenish
Hmm.
just with the food. So V1 is so important because it is critical in the Krebs cycle and the ATP energy cycle in the cell. And so many neurological and psychiatric conditions are actually like an energy crisis. Because, of course, if the body has an energy crisis, it's going to turn off like nervous system and psychiatric functions probably first. It's going to like maintain essential organ functions, right? And it's going to like let you have all these other terrible symptoms instead, right? But again,
Yeah.
it's the body being smart, trying to triage and
Yeah.
prioritize.
Well, your brain needs the
Um,
most energy, so it's like, take
Exactly.
some from
Of
this.
course, they're gonna turn that off first. Yeah. But I see people like chronic fatigue, intrusive thoughts, depression, neuropathy, like all sorts of weird like nervous system sensations that people often come to me with these. You probably see this too, like just very weird symptoms that aren't easy to describe, or define. And those
Mhm.
kinds of things tend to go away when we start the B1.
Yeah, I also really love B1. My partner, my boyfriend, he has all the symptoms of a B1 deficiency. And one of
Oh,
the big reasons that I got it for him, like he'll sometimes get the tingling, anxious before going to bed, tends to stay up too late, but the snoring too. I saw that it even can help with
yeah,
snoring.
sleep
and,
apnea. Yeah.
and he has sleep apnea.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
this like cellular hypoxia phenomenon that happens with it. So it can also be related to people who feel like they can't like catch their breath, like that kind of
Mhm.
air hunger or like shortness of breath feeling, or if you ever wake up like gasping for air, I've seen that resolve. I used to get that too, and that resolved for me on B1. Yeah.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah, so B1 definitely it's on my list too. Anything else that you see really good results with?
Zinc is one that I see
Yeah,
people need a lot. I know there's a
definitely
huge debate
zinc.
like, yeah, is it copper or is it zinc or like, I know there's that debate out there, but I don't know. I see best results. I think a lot of people coming to me um actually have copper toxicity. That's
Yeah,
what I tend to see the most, I really think. And so I do see good results with high dose zinc and also pairing that with B6. I think a lot of people don't realize they have pyroluria and not a lot of places will test for this. I've actually been struggling trying to find a place that will, like a lab I can order from that will test for this. If you've found one, let me know because I'm
I
finding
do.
this.
I do have
You do?
one, but it's like $250, $300 for that one test. And so I was
Yeah. So it's
like,
like,
I'm not
yeah,
going to do it. I'm just going to
right.
not do it.
Because it feels like it's kind of obvious, and so for people it's just a genetic quirk that some people have where you waste B6 and zinc.
Hmm.
It has to do with like the red blood cells. We don't have to get into the chemistry of it right now, but basically you need more zinc and B6 than your average person. And when you're depleted in zinc and B6, you do tend to get symptoms of copper toxicity, which look like a lot of kind of classic psychiatric conditions. So people tend to get very emotionally sensitive. They tend to have learning disabilities. They like hyperactivity or, ADD, ADHD. They tend to be very obsessive compulsive, very anxious. Sometimes it might even be psychosis, like schizophrenia. It might get to that level, but usually it's just people who have kind of always been like high strung, anxious, like hyper emotional. People who tend to be hypermobile also tend to
Hmm.
be like this, or like very pale, like kind of thin skin. There's all sorts of like joints that crack and pop a lot. There's all sorts of these like weird little signs of it, but I see it so much in my clients, and so I agree. I don't even bother. I've given up trying to find. So I tend to just trial the zinc and B6 and see if it helps, and it often does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree. The zinc, I've been on pretty high dose zinc based on my test results for a good, at least a year and a half. And every time I still need more zinc every single time. And I do that based
Yeah.
on HTMA, not
Yeah.
blood work. So blood
Yes.
work, not the best way to know if you need zinc or any mineral really.
Or
Um,
or any of the vitamins too, I want to add, because I have
yeah.
people at the time who say, "Oh no, my doctor tested for B1 deficiency, I'm fine." And then we start
Yeah.
supplementing B1 and their symptoms start going away, right?
Hmm.
So, yeah, so for any of these, I agree. I like HTMA too. I've been running those more often for my clients lately. I find it's really insightful. And yeah, I had to go up to about 90 milligrams of zinc before my white spots on my nails started going away, which would be considered like a very high dose, but that's
Yes.
what yeah.
Yeah, it sounds really high and it feels weird to take that much, but I have yet, even people with mast cell, I have yet to find someone that was like, I can't tolerate zinc
Right.
in its most
It's pretty
elemental
innocuous.
form. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. So what other types of testing are you using? HTMA? Do you run labs or do you use any like functional labs?
So I usually don't start people on labs just because I'm really trying to simplify things for people. And,
Hmm.
as I've kind of indicated, like if you're coming to me with mast cell or, a significant psychiatric or nervous system issue, it's like, okay, well, we can assume you have gut dysbiosis, you have nutrient deficiencies, you probably have heavy metal toxicity, all of the above. And so it's like, will getting a test with that says that formally on a piece of paper make you feel better, or will it actually make you feel more scared of your own body? Because I know for
Mm-hmm.
me, like I got all the testing done, when I was first getting into, natural medicine and functional medicine, and it really it freaked me out because it was like, whoa, my body is really full of that many infections and toxins. Like that's kind of terrifying. So I try to like not go that route initially and just have people again focus on those foundations. But yeah, I think HTMA is probably my current favorite just because of the insights it gives into not only the nutrient levels, but toxic load as well as hormones, right? Like it gives so much
Yeah.
insight into what's happening with the adrenals, what's happening with the thyroid, probably more accurately than a lot of the blood tests do out there. So yeah, other than that, like sometimes I will run just kind of like a basic metabolic panel just to see where like red blood cell, white blood cell, neutrophils, lymphocytes, all of that kind of stuff is at, just because that can indicate some things sometimes. Occasionally, if I'm running into hormone issues that I just really can't figure out, I will run a Dutch test just so we can really target our intervention there. Hormone issues and histamine issues tend to be very common, and usually I see them resolve on their own, but once in a while, there's just that sticky point we need to target. But I'm honestly pretty light on the tests unless we really need to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that approach because, yeah, I would always tell people if you're looking for something, you will find it. And then you'll hyperfixate oftentimes on that and finding that solution and doom scrolling social media and the internet and asking Chat GPT, like, how do I clear this one toxin? And it's like, no, 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 no. That's not where we
My
need to
goodness,
be putting our focus.
goodness, Chat GPT was not a thing when I was healing because wow. Yeah, I know I got sucked into like the forums and message boards enough. But yeah, I mean,
Facebook.
I had that experience. Like everything I tested for always came up positive, no matter what it was. And then my naturopath would have another protocol, detox protocol for me,
Yeah.
and uh yeah, I really try not to get down that road.
Yeah, awesome. So tell us a little bit about the programs that you are running now. Who are they for? How can people find them?
Yeah, so the main program I have going right now is immune resilience. And this is a 6 month coaching program. It's a combination of both group classes and one-on-one classes, or one-on-one sessions, if those are wanted. I really love the group coaching format because I find that people can find such positive community, in terms of people who are like also really trying to shift their life and shift their mindset and look at their illness a different way. I mean, so much of the community around chronic illness out there is very toxic, I think, and just kind of the attitudes it promotes. And so I love giving people an alternative to that. So we really try to have that whole body approach. So when you join the program, you commit to 6 months because we don't want you to feel any of that rush or urgency to implement everything. We want people to be able to take their time and just like have in their head, like, okay, I've already committed to 6 months, so like I don't have to rush. Um, and so we do the neuromeditation classes. We do trauma release classes and nervous system regulation classes. We do classes on nutrition, detoxification, and then other like bonus classes on different aspects of lifestyle and mindset. And yeah, I'm really proud of the program. Honestly, it's like very all encompassing, and I've seen it help a lot of people. So that's the main thing we have going on. We onboard for that every month. So next onboarding is coming up. I don't know when you're going to put this up, but next onboarding is early September. And then I'm about to start a more mental health focused program as well. So we're actually going to have our first just short 4 week group just to kind of test out some of the curriculum and just see how people like it. So it'll be a little bit of a lower cost because it's going to be the first time that we're running it, and then we'll kind of maybe formalize a longer program as we get it all figured out, all the kinks ironed out, right? So this is going to be
Mhm.
called brain nourishment, and so it's really going to focus on helping people get into therapeutic ketosis, which most keto programs out there are focused on weight loss, and so that's not it's going to be taking a very different approach. It's going to be looking at ketosis more for brain health and not for weight loss. And so it's going to be more focused on the nourishment aspects. And the reason is because there's all this research that's been going on, showing how getting into ketosis can really boost your brain energy. And if we're looking at neurological and psychiatric issues as an issue of an energy crisis in the body, what better way to address them than to actually supercharge your cells and give them an alternative fuel source, and then work on replenishing the underlying nutrients that were depleted and probably got you into the symptoms in the first place, at the same time. And so we're gonna do our first program, just 4 weeks, and that's going to be starting in early September as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've never heard of a program out there for that. So congrats. That sounds like a really good one. I was just thinking, with the research on keto for things like mental health symptoms and seizures as well, I think the first thing that was ever studied with keto was with seizures, and so many of the mood stabilizer medications overlap seizures and mood stabilization. So so is that kind of the target audience for people dealing with any sort of mental health symptoms?
Yeah, so that's why people started looking into it, is because it was like, wait a minute, like these anticonvulsants, are prescribed for people with these neurological conditions like epilepsy, and they also work for people with like bipolar disorder and depressive disorder, and it's because the underlying mechanism probably of what's happening in the brain is the same. It's a cellular energy crisis in the brain, and it's just manifesting in different people in different ways for whatever reason. But yeah, they've done pretty powerful clinical studies on major depression, and ketosis, as well as alcoholism and ketosis, and schizophrenia and ketosis. And I actually personally have clients who are, and this is not me saying to get off medication, just clarifying, but I do have clients who are managing their bipolar disorder unmedicated by using therapeutic ketosis. So it's an incredibly powerful intervention. And I think if everyone knew about this, mental illness is, the leading cause of disability claims in the world. And so what a shift it would make if people knew that this was an accessible tool for them.
Yeah, and free.
Yeah, you're buying food anyway, right? So just buy different food. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully people like you and your practices and your programs and your teachings and all of that will expand into more mainstream. I think it's hopeful. We're seeing a lot more people talk about, the root causes of things and the corruption in our big pharma and food industry. And hopefully at least by 20 years, we'll see more of things like this in the mainstream medical community too.
Oh, yeah, fingers crossed. I mean, yeah, there is, with some of these studies coming out, there are people higher up in some institutions who, at least like they've heard of the word ketosis now, and so yeah, I really hope that the awareness will just continue to expand.
Yeah. So tell everyone where to find you. How can they get in contact with you if they want to work with you?
Yep. So my website is Whole Body Healing with Jen. That's Jen, just one N. And on there, I always have I try to do free webinars every couple weeks. So my next free webinar is going to be up there, as well as information about our coaching stuff. And then I'm also Whole Body Healing with Jen on most platforms. I'm on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. Yeah.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, I really appreciate you coming on today. This has been really fun. I'm glad we got to have this conversation. So thank you so much for joining me. Any last words for people who may be at the beginning of their health journey when it's like, oh God, what am I going to do?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just want to reiterate, like, give yourself time. Like, take away any goal you have around, like, this is how it's going to be in 3 months, or I'll be at this place in 6 weeks, or, like, in your mind, give yourself like 5 years, and it probably won't take that long. It didn't take me that long. It doesn't take most of my clients that long, but give yourself that space so you can just take that urgency away and just, I feel like pacing is like the magic word of our conversation today,
Yeah.
but pace yourself.
Yes. Pacing,
Yeah.
slowness. Yes.
Thank you so much. This was beautiful, and I feel like it was such a cool follow-up to the conversation that was on my channel. So I hope people go check that out too, because I feel like that was a good introduction, and this conversation really built on it.
Yeah, for sure. So you have a YouTube, is it Whole Body Healing with Jen as well?
Yep, whole body healing with
Okay,
Jen. Yeah.
perfect. All right. Yes, thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, Jen. Thank you, Jen, again for joining me today. All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you, everyone. I am just so thrilled that you're listening to the Healer Revolution podcast. This has been a huge passion project for me and super therapeutic on top of that, helping me to use my voice and connect with other like-minded individuals. So if you're enjoying the podcast, please like and subscribe. Please share on social media or with your audience or friends or loved ones. I truly appreciate it. It does take a lot of time and financial costs to run the podcast, and it is not a moneymaker, let me tell you. So if you are enjoying this, I would truly appreciate your support just by sending me a post, a like, and a subscribe. Thank you so much.